maka kaina komi moto ona bango
on the 5th anniversary of the coup, which others may not call a coup, we'll find out soon. We are looking at the extent to which that event on the 15th of November 2017 has remained controversial, as we shall see, for example, in the quote from Obasanjo last week, commenting on the event. We will also look at the politics and economics since the coup, which was also in part an implosion within ZANU PF, in which one faction emerged successful on the back of the military support, and the other faction lost, including Mugabe himself. We will look at the fact that the pattern has persisted, whereby Zimbabwe appears to be the only one in the region and beyond, which regards an opposition as anathema, as an outlaw. And I'm reminded of a tweet by Stephen Chan, perhaps reflecting what I said last week on the same subject, who said in a retort to the celebration of the new parliament building, that regrettably Zimbabwe don't seem to know that the parliament is meant for both government and opposition, and yet there's this persistent outlawing of the opposition. We look at the whole conduct of the content of governance, the separation of powers, whether the executive is accountable, how vibrant is the legislature, and how independent is the judiciary. We look also, asking our panelists to look at the possibilities of the process out of the crisis, economic and political, including the possibilities of curing the coup. We are holding the policy dialogue in the context of a confluence or convergence or coincidence of developments over the last week. I made reference to Obasanjo's speech last week to the Pan-African Parliament, in which he expressed regret that the Zimbabwe coup had set a very bad precedent for coups in Africa. Secondly, we have this week, since Sunday, the Commonwealth delegation here to assess the suitability of readmitting Zimbabwe to the Commonwealth. And then we had yesterday the drama around the open letter by Jonathan Moyo and Patrick Joao, both of whom were victims of the coup and may have been killed in the coup, especially Jonathan Moyo. And we also had last night a response from ZANU PF through its spokesman, Chris Mchangwa, welcoming Jonathan and Joao back into the fold, and likewise inviting one of our panelists here, Saviour Kasukuwere, to come back home. We want some reactions to that. So we have a very eminent panel to help us. We have Sarah Dorman, Senior Lecturer in Politics and International Relations at the University of Edinburgh in the UK. Tendai Dubichena, a Zimbabwean South African, former journalist, and until recently advisor to the South African government. Then we have Petina Gappah, international trade specialist, a public intellectual and author. And then Tsitsi Dangarembwa, a renowned and award-winning author, public intellectual too, and a member of the Platform for Concerned Citizens. And then we have Saviour Kasukuwere, also known as Tyson, former cabinet minister in the pre-coup government, and a senior member of the party at the time. And last but not least, Tendai Biti, former Minister of Finance during the GNU, and would-be Deputy President of the CCC. As I've said before the program began, we wish to convey our condolences on the passing of Chris Mchangwa's mother a few hours ago, which makes it impossible for him to participate. And he's scrambling out of Dubai to be here tomorrow. So, Chris, if you are listening, sincere condolences. So, I'll begin with Sarah. But before doing that, I want to read this statement or the report on Obasanjo, who blamed Zimbabwe for allegedly setting a wrong precedent of coups in Africa after late President Robert Mugabe's 2017 ouster was sanitized and packaged as a bona fide means of replacing unpopular regimes outside the ballot. Addressing the Pan-African Parliament last week, Obasanjo said Africa must find a way out of this toxic culture. I quote, "I once moved a motion in 1999 then that any country that has a government not through constitutional means should be suspended," he said. Obasanjo was adamant that a coup should never be disguised as anything else. Quote, "There should be no half measures about these." It started in Zimbabwe, where they said, quote, "It's not a coup, and it's a half coup. It's a near coup," he said, adding, quote, "Citizens of Africa have been able to shun leaders who amend the constitution intending to personally gain from such amendments." Significantly, and in the context of the Commonwealth delegation visit to Zimbabwe, Obasanjo was the one in 2003 who barred Mugabe from attending a Commonwealth summit hosted by Nigeria, and thereby nudging him to quit, as he did, to quit the club. And Obasanjo says he has no regret about the decision made at the time. So there, Sarah, was it a coup? Was a coup a coup? Forgive the moron.
At the time, I said it was a coup, and I certainly haven't changed my mind. A coup is an unconstitutional change of power, and that was very much what Zimbabwe said. The fact that the coup was popular with many people in Zimbabwe doesn't make it any less a coup. And so I think perhaps a more significant question for us would be, and one that has been much debated, is this question of the extent to which the coup meant. Did it reflect the military becoming more significant in Zimbabwe's politics, or did it simply reveal the underlying linkage between the military and civilian government? There are a lot of questions to be asked there, but I think it's a bit rich of Obasanjo, who himself came to power through a coup, to come up with this very sanctimonious critique of coups without at least a little self-criticism. More to the point, I think it's ridiculous to blame Zimbabwe for the rise in coups that we've seen in the past few years. Certainly West Africa has seen more than its share of coups over the years. It's true that there was a definite decline in coup action after around 1990 for some time, although there was still a presence of the military in politics in the form of mutinies and other sorts of engagement. But the question about Zimbabwe's coup is surely why it was accepted. I mean, Zimbabwe's coup leaders were extremely clever. Discursively, strategically, they were able to make a case that people wanted to hear. People wanted to allow that to go forward, and they did that. And that may have set a certain precedent, but coups since the 1950s in African states have almost always been this sort of a correctional coup. They've always been coups that claim to be bringing governments back to democratic governments, back to constitutional governments. So I don't think there's anything really very different here. In some ways, it was very much in line with past precedents for those who study coups and coup practices in post-colonial African states as compared to elsewhere in the world. So it may have felt a bit exceptional at the time. I think in many ways it wasn't particularly exceptional. It was just staged, managed very, very cleverly, and it suited a lot of people's interests to turn a blind eye and say, right, let's move forward. Let's try to bring some change to Zimbabwe. The question for us today, it seems to me, is, was there actually change? Have institutions been reformed? Has the economy improved? Has life improved? Has the political context improved for Zimbabwean people? And I guess that's what we're here to discuss.
Yes, I'm sure the Zimbabweans on the panel will deal with that. But I want to come back to the unconstitutional nature of the coup, if it was a coup, and refer you to the judgment by Judge Shueshe, which said the coup was not a coup, it was legitimate. And he went to state what others would call a very unconstitutional conclusion, that the military had a right to interfere or intervene in politics. Are you aware of that judgment?
I'm aware of it. I think it was somewhat politically motivated.
Yes. But more important, Sarah, for our purposes today, and you as an expert in international relations, what do you think were the reasons why, in particular, the former colonial power, Britain, accepted the coup? What do you think motivated that?
I think to a large
extent. There are also allegations, if I may add, that the British would be in the coup or collaborated in the coup. Have you heard that too?
I tend to not give a lot of credence to conspiracy theories in general. Um, as I said, I think there were a lot of groups, both domestically and internationally, who had been following the political and economic descent of Zimbabwe, who had been really despairing of what was happening there, and who saw hope, saw potential for change, saw potential for reform. I think we all agree that Zimbabwe does have great potential, and I think there were a lot of reasons there. My sense of it was that the international community very much followed SADC and the Southern African community, and that they were not going to go out on a limb against what the region felt. Now, that's not to blame, to put the blame there, but I think it was very much a recognition of what was accepted regionally and locally, and driven by a strong desire to and a strong hope that things would improve in Zimbabwe. So my sense is that the international community was grateful for this cover story. Oh, really, it was constitutional? And it would have been on some level more neo-colonial for them to have challenged that, to have questioned that, to have, and that's not a defense of that position. It wasn't what I said at the time. It wasn't what I, would have advised and maybe did advise at the time, for those who chose to ask me and other colleagues. But I think that there was a very pragmatic recognition that as long as regional leaders in Africa were supportive of this, that there was no incentive for external powers to challenge that.
And now this conundrum or paradox about Zimbabwe's readmission to the Commonwealth. In reference 2003, where Obasanjo himself takes responsibility in part for barring Zimbabwe from the summit. Uh-huh. How are the international community, to put it bluntly, and particularly the Commonwealth and Britain, going to reconcile their blind eye to the coup and the decision that will be made around readmission to the Commonwealth, when in fact there would be an unconstitutional government in Harare?
Well, to some extent, we might argue, some would argue that even if the transition of power in November was unconstitutional, that the subsequent election rectified that. Insofar as the election was conducted following Zimbabwe's rules. I think the challenge for the Commonwealth, and I'm not an expert on the Commonwealth, but my understanding is that its rules are somewhat unclear, and that it goes as much on precedence and on the voting position of members. There is, I think, internationally, and here in the UK, a strong desire to see Zimbabwe fully part of the international community, to restore relationships, to work with people, with friendships and partnerships that have been going on for a long time. There is also, I think, just a desire to move past. And that sounds very trite, I think. But one thing that strikes me when I talk to diplomats, when I talk to and I try to understand the logic there, is that their incentives are to build relationships. To cast people out goes against everything that professional diplomats are trained to do. They are trained to build ties and promote business connections and political connections. And so I think there is a real incentive towards that. I'll be thrilled if Zimbabwe gets back into the Commonwealth, if only because it means Zimbabwean students will be eligible for Commonwealth scholarships again. I think that's one real practical thing. But on the whole, there's not a lot of benefit to being a member of the Commonwealth. What it does is it's much more a symbolic shift. And I think that's why there are mixed feelings among activists, among others, who think it's kind of whitewashing and turning a blind eye to continuing imprisonments, to continuing political violence and so forth in Zimbabwe. But it seems like a process that has started and is likely to continue. But as I said, I think the logic there of the diplomatic community is always towards inclusion and working with, not towards this sort of very atypical putting people off in a, cordoning people off, putting them outside.
Okay, we'll come back to that when we'll get Mugano in to speak about the apparent dilemma, because if you are going to readmit Zimbabwe into the Commonwealth, and then we have to lift sanctions, surely. So let's park Sarah for now. Tendai Dumbuchena. Tendai, do you think South Africa was as expedient as the UK and other international bodies appear to have been in turning a blind eye to the coup in 2017? Tendai? Tendai? Tendai?
You're mute, Tendai.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Were you asleep?
Oh, okay.
Right. I was asking the question.
Okay.
You heard the question?
Thank you.
Do you hear the question?
Yes, I heard the question. I heard.
Okay, thanks.
The question. Yes. I'll say South Africa's response to the coup was never going to be unilateral. Multilateralism is on the coup in Zimbabwe. This meant working with other SADC member states to seek an acceptable outcome. We must, I'm sure we all recall that when the coup occurred, the then president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, was chairman of SADC. He issued a statement while in Luanda, attending a SADC Troika meeting on another matter. He said a full SADC summit would be urgently convened to discuss events in Zimbabwe. Botswana's then president, Ian Khama, said there was no need to convene a summit to discuss why a man who had been in power for 37 years had been removed. The summit was not convened, but obviously phones were ringing in all of the SADC capitals. President Zuma's first act was to send a delegation to Harare led by the then Minister of Defense, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngakula. Her delegation included officials from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and senior military officers. They met all the relevant protagonists in Harare, including Mugabe and General Chiwenga. It was more than a fact-finding mission. Assurances were sought that, one, there would be no violence, with concern expressed for the safety of Mugabe and his family and close comrades in ZANU PF, that there would be no power grab by the military, and that there would be a speedy restoration of constitutional governance. The SADC leaders chose not to convene a summit. That SADC leaders chose not to convene a summit suggests they decided to give Zimbabweans the time and space to resolve the crisis speedily. The faction in ZANU PF that supported Operation Restore Legacy was keenly aware of the need to fast-track political processes within the party and parliament to replace Mugabe with Emmerson Mnangagwa, who at that time had fled to South Africa. Sarah is quite right that they managed to do this skillfully. And their ability to do it saved the day for the coup plotters. It was an indication of how low Mugabe's standing among SADC leaders had fallen, that there was no call for the restoration of his presidency. And the matter just ended there. The AU obviously always takes its cue from regional bodies, and SADC did not object to the coup, and it was never elevated to the level of the continental body.
Now, we are told that SADC is, in fact, behind the move to readmit Zimbabwe in the Commonwealth. Do you think they will see an irony or even a paradox, as I put it to Sarah, between the fact that the coup remains a coup on the one hand, and that you cannot successfully process the readmission without those questions being raised of constitutionalism and the constitution itself?
Well, I'm afraid, as far as SADC is concerned, the Zimbabwe issue is resolved. The constitutionality and legality of the Mnangagwa regime is not in question, and they have decided that not only should sanctions against Zimbabwe be lifted, but that it should be fully rehabilitated as a member of the international community. So there is no chance in hell of SADC changing its current posture on Zimbabwe. And we must also be honest with ourselves. SADC is largely dysfunctional. It's leaderless. The country that's supposed to provide the leadership, South Africa, is in a chaotic state in itself. The ruling party is in chaos. You all follow news in South Africa. You realize that the ANC has never been in such a mess, to the extent that Mbeki expressed concern to the National Executive Committee about the future of the party, especially if Cyril Ramaphosa is impeached, and asked them if they have any plans to respond to that possibility. So you have a South Africa, which on paper is by far the most powerful country in the region, in total chaos, unable to project any power or even influence beyond its borders. So that's where we are with SADC, and shouldn't expect much from that quarter.
But let's get back to South Africa. Is there any debate in Africa around these issues over Zimbabwe?
To be honest, no. No. In fact, interest in Zimbabwe affairs in South Africa only relates to the presence of many Zimbabweans in South Africa, not the state of affairs in Zimbabwe. But of course, with the elections next year in Zimbabwe, and the possibility of violence, depending on the extent of the violence, yes, there might be renewed interest in what is going on there. But at the moment, shouldn't expect much from South Africa.
If also because they've done nothing in the past about it.
Exactly, because I've always said a million times that South Africa cannot influence events in Swaziland, where people have no political rights. They're not allowed to form political parties. They're not allowed to form trade unions. They're treated like feudal serfs. And Swaziland is right in the belly of South Africa, is almost dependent for its economic survival on South Africa. But the government in Pretoria is unwilling to do the right thing for the people of Swaziland by insisting on political reforms in Swaziland. Now, if they can't do it in Swaziland, forget about Zimbabwe.
But the debate over migrants, particularly Zimbabweans, hasn't that tended to put in sharp profile the problems in Zimbabwe themselves, i.e. the political crisis and the reasons why most of those migrants are there?
No, what it has done is to, the people who are agitated by that issue are not concerned about what's going on in Zimbabwe. They just want the migrants out, right? Now, the ANC government over the years turned a deaf ear to calls for it to be more engaged in Zimbabwe to sort out the economic and political situation there, right? But they were not interested at all. And between 2002 and 2009 that's the period when the exodus from Zimbabwe to South Africa was at its most intense. And I recall Mbeki in Parliament being asked what he was doing to ensure that conditions change in Zimbabwe to stop the and his answer was, well, South Africans just have to learn to live with Zimbabweans. Now, that has changed because the issue of migration has become a hot button electoral issue, right? Now the ANC is losing a lot of votes in poor areas, especially in Gauteng, which is and is now responding to the feelings on the ground about migrants. But obviously, Zimbabweans constitute the highest number of foreign migrants in South Africa, and so the issue of migrants in South Africa is synonymous with talking about Zimbabweans. So that's where we are. But that does not translate, or has not translated yet in South Africa, seeing the need to seriously engage with Zimbabweans about sorting the political and economic situation there out.
And I will come back to you, Tendai, but check your link, huh? Your link is there. Check it out.
Okay.
Okay. Let me move on to Petina. Petina, are you there?
Yes, Ivo, I'm here. I hope you can see me.
How are you?
I'm not too bad.
Yes, you're looking looking glorious. How are you?
I'm looking African, Ivo, as always.
Right. Petina, my question to you is very simple. You are on record as being one of the most fervent supporters of the coup, but also as one who dramatically left the government after a few months. So my question to you is, what attracted you so much to the coup? The allegations, as you know, that
When did you
there was we heard you, read you. There was also allegation that it had to do a lot with ethnic collusion, by which I mean the argument within and among some of the coup plotters that the Mugabe and the Zulus had been in for too long. Now it was time for the Karangas to eat, to use a famous clause from a book on Kenya. What is your comment on that?
First of all, Ivo, thank you so much for inviting me, actually forcing me to come to this distinguished panel. You know how reluctant I was. The last time I spoke about my time in government was with Trevor in 2019. And I was kind of hoping to keep my powder dry for my book. But you ask such interesting question, and I'm in such distinguished company. I'm very happy to be here. The last time I saw Sarah was in my kitchen in Edinburgh. The last time I saw Tendai Dumbuchena was in my office when I was a tiny baby lawyer at Kanter and Immerman. And I see Charles Ray is here, and it's just lovely. Thank you so much. Let me start with the last part of the question on the Karanga thing. One of the reasons I love my surname is because no one can tell what ethnic group it is. I was born in Zambia. My dad changed his name from GAPA and added an H and an extra P because he was now an urban African working for Barclays Bank in Kitwe, right? So I love the fact that my name gives me anonymity. So I can tell you without doubt that when I went into government, no one knew that I was Karanga. Apart from the few people that know me, no one knew that I was Karanga. They thought, one, I was a British agent, right? And then when they discovered that I had actually been headhunted by Ambassador Kasande, now in London, they thought Ndrimu Nwamjuru. So therefore I was more to the Zulu leaning side of things. So I received great suspicion. I was sabotaged, I was attacked because people couldn't quite work out what my agenda was. And my agenda was very simple. And it's an agenda, unfortunately, that is not shared by many people, which is why I left. And my agenda was the country, right? I want Zimbabwe to do well. And I left Igbo because I felt that the level of ambition was too low. That's pretty much why I left. Tendai Biti can testify that in 2012, I worked on the MDC manifesto from Harvest House. I ran screaming from Harvest House after 3 months. I lasted longer with ED's government, 18 months. And I left Tendai Biti's project because this was the time of the fractures in the MDC. And Tangat Chinzi, Muriwan Wabiti, you are Biti's people, right? So we're being targeted, harassed at the door and so on. But one of the things I worked on was re-engagement, international trade and investment. I still have my documents. I'm never going to reveal them, but I still have them. And I remember this one statement that we came up with: Zimbabwe is ready for business. That was the MDC platform, right? The ZANU PF platform, the ZANU PF government platform was Zimbabwe is open for business. So what I'm saying is I worked in an area where there was convergence, right? MDC policy, ZANU PF policy, right? Because if you're a small developing country, you want to attract international investment. If you're a small developing country and you're a member of the WTO, you want to honor your trade obligations. If you're a small developing country, you want to ensure that you adhere to your international obligations, right? So that's why I went in, not because I loved the coup, right? I went in because I love my country and I wanted to work for my country. In the same way that I worked for those 3 months for the MDC, I worked for the government of Zimbabwe. I didn't work for ZANU PF. I worked for the government of Zimbabwe, which was led by ZANU PF, right? And on the question of why I left, I really need to emphasize this, and I can't emphasize this enough. I left in sorrow, not in anger. I left in disappointment, not bitterness. I'm very proud of my work. Because I went in there, we now have a world standard investment treaty, ZIDA, right? That was my project, right? I went in to draft ZIDA, shepherd it through parliament. I went in to help attract investment. I went in to help project Zimbabwe on the international arena. So, and I'm very, very proud of that work. And that work stays. Because for me, my passion is building institutions. I don't believe in strong men, I believe in strong institutions, right? And I was very amused actually when I heard you summarize what President Obasanjo said, because we met President Obasanjo in Abidjan in March 2018. In fact, I worked very hard to get him and the president, Emerson Mnangagwa, together, because when I was in Geneva, I used to advise the Africa Progress Panel on which President Obasanjo was. And interestingly, none of these concerns about the coup were shared by President Obasanjo at the time, which makes me agree with dear Sarah, who says that the coup attracted different people for different reasons, right? I remember one opposition leader calling it a miracle. I remember another opposition figure telling Zuma to stay out and concentrate on South Africa. You know, Tavani Mpofu represented the litigant who declared the matter constitutional before Judge Situation. Tendai Biti and I talked about whether we should go in, and Tendai Biti very bluntly said, I won't go in alone. And there were so many interests that wanted this thing to happen, because people forget that the previous few years under President Mugabe were really difficult for a lot of people. So there was a sense that something fresh was coming, something new was coming. Unfortunately, it didn't come because we forgot the words of Orwell. People don't grab power in order to relinquish it, right? You don't do something as extraordinary as that, face treason, possibly face the death penalty, just so that you can share power. And I think that's the mistake we made, those of us who supported this, what we thought was a change. But I have no doubt at all that everybody from the opposition, the diplomatic community, people within ZANU PF, everyone who supported this thing did it for the purest of intentions, right? Did it because they thought change had come to Zimbabwe. Is it their fault that they were disappointed? No. Let's talk about the fault where it is. But you can't blame people for hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that sings in the soul and never gives up at all. You can't blame people for being happy that Mugabe had gone. You know, so I'm going to stop there. But I will just say one last thing. You probably want to ask a follow-up, but I will just say one thing.
A follow-up, maybe you can deal with that then, which is this, where are we now in Zimbabwe? 5 years after the coup.
This is where I want to get to, right? Because I think what we need to talk about is not to obsess over who supported what side in the coup. But I agree. The question is, what does it mean for us now? Yes. Right? And I go back to what I said about Orwell and power. If you guys really think that that extraordinary series of events happened just so that ZANU PF could go into opposition in 2023, I think we really need to start talking seriously here, right? And while I'm there, Ibo, I think that we need to redefine how we see the international community. As I find it very offensive that when we talk about the international community, we're talking about predominantly white democracies. Zimbabwe is a part of the international community. It doesn't need to be readmitted. It's a member of the United Nations, right? The Commonwealth joining was a two-pronged strategy, right? That was developed because the Commonwealth rejoining was a message, as Sarah says, a symbol that an old quarrel had been mended. But in terms of membership, I mean, honestly, the Commonwealth, in terms of membership, it means nothing as important as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, for instance, which is, you know, where I've been working, and I'm very passionate about that. And we don't see any conversations about that. But the Commonwealth really was supposed to be symbolic in nature, to indicate to the world that the quarrel with the old colonial master had been resolved. And that's really all it ever was. Yeah.
That's interesting. We'll park you for now.
Let
me move on
to be parked.
Thanks. Tsitsi, welcome, Tsitsi.
Hello, Ibo. Hello, how are you?
I'm okay, my dear. Again, my question is very simple. Why was there so much excitement about the coup? Do you agree with what Petina said, which is that the people were so tired of Mugabe that anything would do? And if so, what has gone wrong?
Why was there so much excitement about the coup? Well, I just wanted to begin by saying thank you very much for inviting me to this panel and for your introduction. I would like to remind you and other people that I'm also a filmmaker, and I think that is relevant to the discussion. Okay, it's relevant to the discussion.
But I forgot your most recent passion. It's all right.
And that's not my most recent passion. It's actually my profession that I train for.
Okay.
Writing is my hobby. So the reason why I bring this up is because a film is a visual content, is the medium that speaks to the greatest amount of people. And in this conversation, I know we are talking about politics, but what I have not heard yet is the people. So when you ask me, why do you think there was so much excitement? Now we are coming to the issue of the people and what was going on with the people at that time. What was going on with the people had begun a long time as we know in the history of Zimbabwe. So let's bring it down to that history that is connected with ZANU PF, which is the liberation struggle, where there was extreme violence against people of my color. In fact, the most people who suffered and were tortured and died and were intimidated and threatened were people of my color. And these were people who were supporting that process because, again, a discursive argument had been made that through our doing this to you, your lives will become better. So this never in fact stopped. In fact, Magaisa and other people have documented how at every point in Zimbabwe's history where power was potentially to be redistributed, these tactics of the liberation struggle were brought up to bear against the people. And the people had memory. So the memory of trauma is that the next instigating factor does not have to be as strong as the initial factor to draw out the same reaction or even a greater reaction. So this is the situation that we are in with ZANU PF and the people of Zimbabwe. We are a psychologically traumatized people. We will do anything that ZANU PF says because of this trauma. There was a little moment after independence where it seemed as though some people, and not even all Zimbabweans, but just some Zimbabweans, were going to be given a period where they could maybe rehabilitate and begin to develop their own agency. And that quickly came to an end when it was seen that by educating people and allowing any kind of free debate, you were allowing space to grow where powers that might actually be able to move against you. So the real problem is the traumatization of the people of Zimbabwe, the fact that there has been no social psychological recovery from that trauma. And until we begin to see this as an important factor, I don't think that we can even be surprised when people suddenly say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and ZANU PF click their fingers and they all lie down. This is going to be the way it's going to be.
How do we get out of it?
It is late. It is very late. One of the reasons why we have not got out of it again is because at the level of power, the issue of the rehabilitation of the nation as a group of individuals, different groups of individuals, has never really been addressed up until now. Even now, we're talking about trade and we're talking about being readmitted to the Commonwealth, but we are not talking about what kind of well-being does the ordinary Zimbabwean have. We have a scourge of drugs amongst our population. So I think when we talk politics, we need to make the connection between politics and the people. I was just thinking.
So it's about agency. What there should be an agency for change?
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean.
Well, we have goals to improve. The goal is to improve the livelihood of the average Zimbabwean in Zimbabwe, right? However, there's need for an agency, political and economic agency, to which to improve. What do you see as a possibility of an agencyship in Zimbabwe? Any potential? Any promises?
ZANU PF, what we need are agencies and organizations that are able to engage with the people on the ground in the way that they should be engaged with. But those are the people who are now targeted by ZANU PF. And especially in the rural areas, it is almost impossible for people to do that work of agency building in the rural areas. So until we can begin to do that and return to an education that is actually an education and not just a numbing of the mind and preparing the mind to regurgitate facts, we are not going to get out of this. This is what we would call a symbolic crisis that we are in at the moment, because at the end of the day, it is only the people of Zimbabwe who can convince SADC, who can convince other people that, look, we have a crisis. But if they see all the school children dancing with posters on the 25th of September, it is justification for SADC's position that all is well in Zimbabwe. So this militarization that was consolidated by the coup has in fact closed that little space that existed for this citizen agency building. And that is where a lot of work has to be done. In the rural areas, we saw people being asked, why are you out on this anti-sanctions parade? And it was because I don't have fertilizer or I don't have seed. So again, ZANU PF is being very manipulative discursively, but we know that is what they do. So
aren't you being modest, Tsitsi? Recently, you were part of our team, which managed to raise awareness about the imprisonment of people like Job Sikala and the other Yatsima group. You were a fantastic agency, 53,000 signatures. Aren't you being a bit modest about your own potential for agencyship? Needless to add, one of the reasons why you are here is about agencyship.
Thank you, Ibo. That was an effort of many of us together. But the point that I'm trying to make is that kind of agency, which is carried out generally in the digital space, is very limited. And ZANU PF is very aware that it is only a tiny percent of Zimbabweans, which is one reason why data prices are so high. It's to make sure that people do not have access to those platforms. So until we can get the average Zimbabwean to understand the issues and somehow begin to rehabilitate from this national trauma that we have, it is going to be very difficult. Do you know, it is not something that a Zimbabwean is ashamed of to say, oh, I'm not going to stand up for anything because I might get killed. You know, it is so much part of our nation, our fabric, that is an excuse that people say, I'm just going to watch and let them do whatever they want because they might kill me. That is where ZANU PF has brought us. And I think that is even a worse stage than we had been brought by white colonialism.
Do you think the fact that part of the malaise of the last 20 years, in which up to 75% of Zimbabwean professionals outside the country will have depleted, undermined agencyship or the potential for Zimbabweans to ask serious questions, to congregate around some agency and demand change? Do you think that is a factor? That our own ills have become an additional constraint to change, political and social change in Zimbabwe?
Absolutely, I think so. This is what I am trying to get at, to say that the kind of personhood, Zimbabweanhood that we have developed or that has been inculcated into us puts us in a position where it is very difficult for us to muster that agency that could result in change. For example, when it seemed as though people needed the external people, countries needed justification for the coup, we had the military come and tell us to go out onto the street. If we had been able to stay at home at that day, we could be talking about something different now, but we were not able to stay home. We all went out. I was surprised. But that is the problem that we have. And that is one of the levels at which serious work needs to be done. The professionals who go out of the country, I think, are people who want to further their careers. But there is a growing idea that there are outliers who people would never think of, who actually can exert some charismatic influence on people. And I think that Zimbabweans should be looking for those kinds of people and trying to see how they can be made to bring
well, I should
some impact.
add that diaspora is what in turn is keeping livelihoods to almost 2.9 billion a year remittances, without which many of our people would be destitute.
Right.
So anyway, I'll park it there and move on to back to the coup with one of the victims of the coup, Saviour Kasukuwere, Tyson. Welcome, Tyson. Tyson. Tyson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back.
No, I was following, but thank you very much, Dr. Mandeza.
My question is very simple. The coup, what is it all about?
Well,
2 days ago.
Thank you very much, Ibo, and thank you very much, fellow panelists here. I think two colleagues have spoken, Tsitsi especially, and Petina, have struck a chord, a correct chord. And I think I take quite a lot from what Tsitsi has said. And I summarized by saying the coup is a result of, I call it even a spirit in our country that continues to be very violent. It feeds on some kind of power that even anybody in leadership can wake up running tomorrow. I think, again, I come back to Tsitsi's presentation. What's central will be issue of national healing and reconciliation. Our country is long overdue for this. The coup, we saw it coming. It was very clear. The tanks were moving around the city and the country. The motive behind the coup is perhaps what we might also want to interrogate going into the future. Whilst there will be mitigating factors or reasons why, who got so angry and so forth, those are all issues. But clearly, the party I belong to, the party I was a member for a long time, has a view that we will run this country forever. And there are individuals also within the system who say, we will not give in to any other force. Whatever it takes, we will remain in place and we'll have to do what we have to do. So come the 2017, perhaps this is best captured by the article written by Professor Moyo and John and Joao, where in their second page, they basically articulate some of the features of how the young generation in the party felt, which is to say, we needed to, obviously, do away with this element of entitlement. We had to do away with this violence track in our society, or especially in the party. There are quite a number of things that they enumerate, which perhaps made certain characters uncomfortable. So the night of the 15th, the night before, on the 14th, when we left cabinet, the air was pregnant already. There'd been movements, tankers all over the city, all over the country. And when we went home, I got several calls from colleagues who said, "Are you sure? Are you safe?" One director called me and said, "Minister, you're going to go home, but there will be an operation that's happening tonight, and your house could be one of those targeted." So by 2:15 in the morning, the Christmas descended on my village. Guns started firing very early in the morning. Professor Mo and I were in the same room. And well, it wasn't a joke. And I'm saying this, I'm trying to relate this to what Tsitsi was saying. Here I am, a member of the party, a child of the party, having to now feel the other end of my own system. Now, they were not sending roses into my house. This was gunfire. Not only small ammo, very serious ammo was coming through. But this is the politics of our country. After a couple of minutes, we escaped, we find our way out. The now famous Mama Sefes. We hosted for a while. We have to leave our children and families there. And we disappear. This will be for another time. But I think essentially, whatever it means as a society, as a country, I think we need to put racks and say, can't we engage and talk about our differences? Zimbabwe is long overdue for some kind of heart-to-heart discussion where we have empathy with each other. There's a lot that we've missed over the years. Other countries are moving forward, but we are stuck in violence. We are stuck in pain against each other. We are stuck in ensuring that I win at all costs. It's never about the country winning, but about the individual winning. What is it that we want to achieve? We must be able to achieve together. I think there is a feeling that I would rather run this race and win as an individual. Rather, if we run together, all of us, Zimbabwe will be a better country. You've discussed this matter, Dr. Mandasa, just now about the diaspora remittances, the skills flight and so forth. These are very critical issues and very painful ones. If you come to think of the number of young people outside our country who are making a living, perhaps even as street cleaners or housemates, and are lawyers. Some are actually even now applying to go to London as to go and join the services just as cleaners and so forth. We need to be able to start having a serious dialogue. I don't want to ask you.
Do you think it has begun, the dialogue? Do you think, two questions, related questions. The first is ZANU PF your party? You call it your party? You're still a member of ZANU PF? You are still a member of ZANU PF?
I always say, who fired me?
Yeah,
because when I left that night, the country, I was still a member of ZANU PF.
Well, I saw, you saw Mchangwa's interview last night with Tommy Stolle.
No, I didn't see it. I have heard about it, but I didn't see it.
Well, he's welcoming Jonathan Moyo and Joe back to the party. And he says, you too are welcome back to the party. He said that last night.
Well, I think what I'll do is I'll have to look at it and study what he said. I think it will be very interesting to see what.
Well, and the point I'm making is that he's actually saying you're outside there in the cold and you're welcome.
Well, I'm not so sure when they talk about the weather, whether it's really cold or warm. But, yes, but and this is the problem. Everybody thinks, and this is our preponderance as Zimbabweans, we just have to be in political power to be relevant. I think we need to disabuse ourselves of that notion. Let's allow all sectors, let's allow all fields of persuasion to become greater. It should not be about politics. Dr. Ibo, Switzerland, you and I, if I was to say to you, who is the president of Switzerland? You don't even know him, but what you know is that Switzerland is a powerful country. It's a country which is doing very well. But in Africa, we know more of the presidents, including the poverty that our people live in. And I think we need to get to a stage also where we say, can't we start having a discussion around not just about the power of the individual, Petina spoke about the institutions. Let the institutions do their part, but presidents and leaders must encourage for all sectors to develop. So that's my view.
One of the legacies of our states, African states, including Zimbabwe, is the tendency or the reality to see the state as the means to primitive accumulation. And therefore, when you're out of office, not out of cabinet, and even dumped to the party, you're really on the margins of the feeding trough. Does this explain, are people correct to conclude that those who are in exile like yourselves are burning to get back into office for those reasons?
Well, there will be that view.
You know, for example, the Congress, ZANU Congress was held a fortnight or so ago. We had many of your colleagues who had been out there, people like Goche, Chafika, and many others, back in the Central Committee, back, one by one, people who say cynically, back in the feeding trough.
Yeah, you know, Comrade Mandaza, we're a democracy. Zimbabwe is a democracy, and I can put that in inverted commas. It allows for individuals to seek office, and that's a constitutionally guaranteed right for any citizen. So you can't stop them if they decide to stand. But I also believe that it's not just about all of us having to try and fight to recover power. That's a dangerous notion, and I think we need to move away from that. What I would want as Saviour Kasukuwere is a freedom to do what I want to do in my country. Whether I'm in business, whether I'm a farmer, it's not just about being a leader or being a member of parliament or being a minister. I wasn't born.
But you believe this claims such as those outlined in Jonathan and Jo's memo? Do you believe it's a vain claim to say ZANU PF is an ideological party, that it is a reflection of the virtues of the liberation struggle? Others would say it's nothing less than just a looting machinery. That it has lost all relationship to the principle of the struggle, that it's all competition for who can eat more, and that the politics has become a livelihood. The difference between being unemployed and being an MP or a car and allowance. What do you say? What is ZANU PF now as a party?
Well, I think there's merit in saying the ideological foundation of the party was very clear. The reasons that persuaded many Zimbabweans to support and back ZANU PF, ZAPU, the fight for Black independence for us. That was
then. I'm talking about now.
But I'm saying, yes, I'm just trying to deal with the ideological foundations, which I think are quite very solid. If you talk about what's written in black and white, it's solid. When it comes to implementation, that's not a very different ballgame. And I think that's the unfortunate part. And this is what that paper tries to say, that if we can live up to the commitments or the views or the decisions that the people have made over the years, that is to say, let's uplift our society. Let's really control our resources. Let's do the best that we can to remove our people out of poverty. And other countries have done so successfully, including one of the countries who look up to, China. So I agree on the fact that what is written in black and white in terms of the manifesto, in terms of the aspirations of the party, and they talk about the struggle. You can't build a political party ignoring the sacrifice by the people of Zimbabwe. Mind you, it's not individuals, but it was a collective responsibility by our people. So many people died, and they are buried perhaps in shallow graves or in mountains. But would
you agree there's a disconnect between the government and the people? Would you agree?
Yeah, that's why I say the implementation, number one, has created that disconnect.
Would you think ZANU PF would still be in power without the military, which has been an active agent at every election since 2000, leading up to the coup? And the coup, if you remember, one of the reasons for the coup, at least according to Chiwenga and others, was that they were afraid that ZANU PF might lose the elections the following year. Therefore, to save ZANU PF from losing elections, the coup. That's one of the reasons in the document. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm outside the country, because of the so I don't think you can persuade me any further there.
Okay, I'll leave you to rest for a while.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Tyson has made reference, and I've highlighted the apparent disconnect between the government, the state, and the people. What would you say is the record of the period since the coup with respect to the economy and the allegations about increasing corruption? Tendai, BT.
Well, thank you very much, Sakuribo. I'm afraid you can't see my ugly face because I'm in Harare and I don't have power running on a generator. So if I put on my video, I'll cut the entire connection. So let me just say, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very clear, very clear.
All right, yeah. So let me just say that this conversation which we are having just, emphasizes the disconnect, the disempowerment, the devaluation of our body polity that we've gone through for 4 years of vicious conflict and intolerance. You have two wonderful authors in the form of Petina Gappah and Petina Gappah, fantastic literal giants on the African continent. In a normal country, we should be discussing about Tambo in its nervous conditions, or a memory in Petina Gappah's a book of memory. But because of the failed nature of our politics, we are discussing failure. We are discussing extraction. We are discussing authoritarian hegemony. So I want to agree with those that say we need a new consensus. We need a new social contract. We need new levels of interaction and intervention. It's a broken society. It's a broken country. We've been mutilated. We've been vandalized by autocracy, by a political system, a political party built on the couch of entitlement, built on the culture of impunity, built on what Saviour Kasukuwere calls the messianic complex. No one can have it except myself. No one can rule except a ZANU PF. In the Solomonic parable of the women fighting over the baby, ZANU is the party that will say, let's cut the baby in half. And that's the tragedy of Zimbabwe. And that's the real conversation which we need to have. How do we disentangle from this morass of decay, of capture, of corruption, of extraction, of hegemony, and create a new Zimbabwe and make a new Zimbabwe possible? How do we do
that, Tendai? How do we do that?
That's the conversation which we need to have. But I think there's to be a democratic breakthrough. We need a democratic breakthrough, but the democratic breakthrough has to be nuanced. It has to involve everyone. The agents you were talking about, the agents of every citizen. So it's not about a political party. It's not about an opposition political party. It's about the collective agency of all of us. But of course, we need the international community. We need SADC. We need Cyril Ramaphosa. We need the African Union to shepherd the transition, because we don't have on our own the power to deal with the internal forces that are
but there. You need a strong opposition party. Do we have one?
The opposition are the people. So the opposition are the people.
The party,
the opposition is the citizen. Is the citizen mobilized enough to understand that he cannot continue, she cannot continue taking refuge in fatalism? 73% of our people 73% of our population are outside the country. The best of our people are outside our country. When do we get to that stage that all of us are shareholders and stakeholders in this fight for democratic change? So don't focus on the opposition movement. Let's focus on the citizen. Is the citizen mobilized enough, organized enough, active enough to fight for democratic change in Zimbabwe? Don't create a monarchian construct. Don't create a we and them, an opposition and us. We are all part of a citizen that has got an obligation to create change and change in our lifetime.
A political party is an agency. The opposition party is an agency for change.
Yeah, but the starting point is the citizen. The starting point is the citizen.
Is the relationship between, we talked about disconnect between ZANU PF and the state on the one hand and the people on the other. Is there sufficient connect between the CCC and the people, the citizens?
Absolutely, with beyond reasonable doubt. This is a formation formed in January 2022, but look at the numbers we are able to pull off. So the issue is not about numbers. Clearly, people want change. The people is, do we have a state and a system that is ready to deliver a transition with all the capture and the rise of the securocratic state that you yourself have written about? Those are the structural issues that we need to deal with. The citizen is clear. The citizen wants change. The citizen wants transformation. You know that. I know that.
So I need not ask you your position on the coup. What has been the record so far economically and socially and politically?
It has been an absolute disaster, a complete disaster. You know, a descent into a morass of kleptocracy. I thought I had seen corruption, but not until this regime, came along. The country's become a huge arena of personal accumulation and personal aggrandizement. Under Mugabe, it was clear that the motive of reproduction was the power retention agenda. Under Emerson, it is quite clear that power is just an accessory to the bottom line. Power is just an accessory to accumulation. And so you look at what I call the commanding heights of corruption. You look at the US dollar, the commodification of currency, and the centrality of the central bank in that looting sphere. You look at fuel and energy, in particular hydrocarbons, a $2 billion industry. You look at command agriculture, $6 billion has been put in command agriculture, but we have nothing to show for it. We are actually importing food from Zambia as I'm talking to you, right now. Number 4, you look at our commodities. Our commodities are being siphoned left, right, and center. $1 billion worth of gold is being stolen from Zimbabwe. $1 billion worth of tobacco is being stolen from Zimbabwe. Lithium concessions are being given left, right, and center. Platinum concessions are being given left, right, and center. Diamonds, chrome. So it's a dog's breakfast. Number 5, you look at contracts, public procurement. They are constructing roads, Harare to Beit Bridge. We are very happy about that, but no one talks about the cost. It normally costs $1 million a kilometer to construct a road. It's costing around $3 million except that is being paid in local currency. They've just opened a small little energy power plant, Wange 7, 300 megawatts, that have cost $1.2 billion. It should have cost around $300 million. Beit Bridge border post cost $200 million, a job that should have cost $40 million. That's just on corruption. What about the quality of life that Tsitsi was talking about? 79% of our people are living in extreme poverty, surviving on less than $1.25 a day. The recent and very well written report by the World Bank is got frightening statistics. They talk about building a 2030 upper middle class income. Our economy has to grow by 15% annually, and that is not possible. What about the crisis of the exchange rate? multi-currency regime, multi-exchange regime, inflation of 300%, still the highest in the world, real wages of less than $100 a day. So it's a dog's breakfast. The state of our education, the state of public hospitals, there are no Panadols. I lost my grandfather recently. They couldn't give him painkillers at the Paranato Hospital, the biggest hospital in Zimbabwe. So, in short, the coup has been an absolute disaster, a complete disaster, and the people are suffering. That's why we need the new consensus as a matter of agency, because our people can't survive.
Can the coup be cured, Tendai? Are elections possible panaceas towards the curing of the 2023 election?
The election is just a one day that comes after the election. Just one day. We have to undergo. Look, any solution to the Zimbabwean crisis that simply think that an election held one day can resolve 44 years of abuse. Some would argue 100 years of abuse from 1890. I would go as far as 1850. It's not going to be possible. So we need genuine dialogue that will, however, ultimately must end in a situation, in a scenario where the citizen is allowed to choose. So that's the end. So we need dialogue that focuses on creating and recreating an articulated common consensus, not the disarticulated, fragmented vision that we have at the present moment. What does it mean to be a Zimbabwean? What Zimbabwe do we want? What are our collective fears? If I am a war veteran, what is my fear? If I am a worker from Chitungiza, what is my fear? If I am a Ndebele citizen from Cholocho, what is my fear? What is Gukura Hundi to me? What is the alienation and the reification that I've gone through? That conversation is not there. And that is the conversation which we want. What does it mean to be a Zimbabwean? And what is that Zimbabwean which we want? Ultimately, we can then go to elections.
Tenda, I'll come back to you because we want you to elaborate more what you mean by dialogue. What will be the process? We are a few months away from the elections, and just to say rightly, it's unlikely to solve the problem. More possibly to be a question of history repeating itself, not a disputed election, already violent, the process. So I'll come back to you. But let me go back to the panelists, begin with Sarah. Sarah, you heard your fellow panelists talk. Is there any question you would like to raise, Sarah?
Thank you. Yes, it seems to me that the thing that we're not really discussing or that we're dancing around a bit is ZANU, the party. And the question that I would like to ask is, in particular, perhaps to Kasukuwere, is why did ZANU fail to transfer power internally? All the other liberation parties in the region were able to move power between generations. This is why they didn't have coups. The coup was a result of the failure of power to move between generations. So if ZANU cannot do that, and it seems to me what we are seeing is this. This also relates to this question about the relationship to opposition in other parties, to the need to hold on to power. But it seems to me this is absolutely crucial. Why was ZANU incapable? As somebody who was perceived for many years as a likely successor to the former president, why was ZANU unable to do this?
Tyson, there's a big question for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Admittedly, I think I really accept that ZANU did not manage the succession process. There is one thing that I said, even I used to joke this with Kemba Mohadi, that you allow the old men to eat into your time. And this was because the old men sat on the top like a tripod. There were two factions, right, that were contesting for power. And the old man was a very astute politician who, each time one of the teams was surging ahead, i.e. 2005 or 4 thereabout, ED had a commanding voice within the party. He could have become vice president. The old men would also simply nicely allow the other team to start moving forward. And the next time again, when Mamjuru is moving forward. So this was basically, he was able to play off. The teams within the party were never honest with each other to say, guys, let's sit down, let's have a process, a transition process that will ensure that the future of our party, the future of our country is done in a methodical way. And hence we are where we are. We now have a
dysfunctional party. A dysfunctional party.
Well, where the change is now organized or obtained through the ballot, through the barrel of the gun, which should not be the case. I think the party has had so much goodwill across the country. It had done well. If only we had been able to say, for how long were we going to have President Mugabe? After the 2000 elections, thereafter, maybe 2010, his intention, which I remember, he had intended to step down in 2010. But certain factors did take place then, which meant that he remained in office. This is 2008, and then with that accumulation with the MDC, and he stayed on. Then to 2013, when he won. And we thought, after winning, he was going to now then put together a process within the party that would lead to a much more stable succession program. By the time he sat down with me as his national political commissar and said, I am going to be stepping down. He said this to me in Mexico when we were having a conference there. We sat down for about 7 hours, the two of us. And he said, Minister, political commissar.
2017.
2017. Okay. Yeah, we sat down. He gave me a very clear mandate. Let's now start organizing. I am going to be stepping down. I believe this was perhaps a bit late in terms of the dynamics within the party. Those other colleagues who were also looking at the watch, and their age was advancing. They were getting to 79, some to 80. They also wanted to test the power, and they wanted to be in. I believe if this had been discussed within the party, there was no need for what we ended up going through. And I also believe the appointment of Comrade Mnangagwa as vice president was an indication at that very moment that President Mugabe wanted then Comrade Mnangagwa to come in. This is a discussion he also had with us to say, well, this is what I think we must do. Let Mnangagwa come in and then we can move forward. But ZANU being ZANU PF, there was this secretive nature of doing things, which created a bit of a problem for us. And that's why, to this day, the amount of plotting and planning seems to remain a constant factor within the political party. So this, I think I agree with you, Sarah, we should have stuck to a constitutional process which says the president can be challenged. The big problem in ZANU PF today is nobody can stand up and say, I want to be president. You rather say that when you're in exile. You can't say that when you're in Zimbabwe. When you're going to Congress, everyone will treat you like a treasonous character. What are they trying to achieve? And I think this is what must be dealt with. Any political party, this is CCC, their constitutions must be clear. Succession is very important. How many terms can a leader serve in a given party, then hand over to others? I think Botswana has been doing that very well. Tanzania, Chama Pinduzi have been doing that very well. And you can see the stability in Chama Pinduzi. The same goes for Frelimo. They were doing the same thing. There was a point where we sent in a delegation of leaders. A team was composed of the late Mjuru, Comrade Mnangagwa, Comrade Goche, Opam Chinguri, Dr. Sekeremai. I think there was two, Dubis Dabengwa. This team was put together in around 2009, if I'm not mistaken, to say, can we adopt the models that are being used by the liberation movements? These teams went around, they got the constitutions, but interestingly, one by one, they'll go to the old man and say, you see, this is being moved by so and so, he wants you to go. This one is, so the old man will simply say, when one colleague said to me, the old man confronted him when he went to present this proposal. He says, oh, it appears you are very keen that I go, eh? Your other colleagues are not saying the same thing. And this guy immediately packed his briefcase and said, Excellency, thank you very much. Now, This is part and parcel.
So the bottom line, Tyson, is that Mugabe didn't want to go right to the end until May 2017, which, as you said, it was too late. So Mugabe was the problem on succession, right?
Well,
I'll come back to you. Let me just go back
agree.
to Sarah.
Okay.
Let me come back to Sarah. Sarah, there's a question which we only hinted at, was mentioned in passing, which is the relationship between the Commonwealth and Commonwealth readmission and sanctions. Now, before you come back on that question, I wanted to just bring in Professor Gift Mugano, just to tell us, to unpack this sanctions issue. There has been a debate in Zimbabwe on whether it is sanctions which are responsible for the malaise in the economy, or it's corruption, or a combination of both. Gift Mugano? Sisi, I'll come back to you. Gift?
Thank you, Doc. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I'm happy to see Ngoma Tyson, Honorable BT, whom I think is the best Minister of Finance in our history. Okay, I'll come back to your question now, but let me just unpack sanctions to say, are they real? So we have financial sanctions. Zimbabwe cannot access funding from IMF, World Bank, and the multilateral financial institutions. So if you read the data, it's very clear in terms of what are the contents of the sanctions. We also have sanctions, and under the Colonial agreement, we cannot access development aid, but we don't have trade sanctions. We can still trade with the international community, the European Union, the Western countries. Now, I have this view that in as much as sanctions are hurting, we have our own self-inflicted sanctions, which are quite massive, which are hurting more than sanction. And I'm very clear about this, and I have no apology. When you look at corruption, for example, the point which you are raising, Dr. Mandaza, on a yearly basis, we lose $1.8 billion to illicit financial flows. The amount of which, even if sanctions are removed, we cannot access $1.8 billion from IMF or World Bank per year. And we, as a country, through our leadership, have not put measures to stop that. Then, of course, also, if you look at the Auditor General report, shows you that we squander resources in the region of close to $1 billion every year. And it's quite glaring that when you add these numbers, we are talking of close to $3 billion, which we lose every year. And if you then quantify that in 20 years, we are talking of $60 billion, which we lost through corruption. And our government only started on the cost of sanction on the economy is around 40 billion, which of course is a methodological approach can be questioned, but let's leave it there. But it's also important to note that over and above corruption, we have serious policy measures which are quite wrong. You are aware that just recently, in May this year, the president of this country suspended lending. We gave ourselves sanction because we are struggling to get funding from IMF, and domestically, we suspend lending. And we are kind of taking our oxygen out of the system, and we are killing the economy. And that shock has remained a permanent shock, because even the official lines of credit, which this country was accessing from the region, were also suspended because that was an indicator that the country is getting into hot gear as far as the election is concerned. So we have now to pay upfront some of our procurement from outside the country. Now, what do you make out of the 200% interest rate? We're sanctioning ourselves. You must be a thief to borrow 200% and pay it back. There's no business which can borrow that money. So, but we are complaining about sanctions. So it's much more of what we are doing domestically, right? The suspension of the stock exchange almost 3 times during this dispensation. We need portfolio investments. We can't access money from World Bank under sanctions, as we are saying, but also suspend the stock exchange. Even to date, the old Mutual, PPC, and CDCO are on suspension. These are the biggest boys on the stock exchange. And are we attracting investment by doing that? The answer is no. So this
why is that being done, Gift?
I don't follow,
is there a rationale somewhere? Or just
there's no rationale. I think one would have slept on the wrong side of the bed, because you cannot have a policymaker suspending, for example, EcoCash, when you know that in the national payment system, 87% of the transaction are in EcoCash, and you suspend EcoCash. And when we then raise this issue that the economy is going to collapse within a week if you don't, because that's very apparent, then they lift suspension. So I fail to find logic in this, unfortunately. So you also look at the distortion. How much money, Biti was talking about billions of dollars being put into agriculture. World Bank just presented a country memorandum where they have shown that for the last 20 years, we have spent a lot of money, billions of dollars into agriculture. But in as far as our productivity as a country, in sub-Saharan Africa, across all sub-Saharan Africa, we are the lowest, 10 times lower regional counterparts. But they are pumping money into agriculture. But you know, if you go around now, the farming season now, government is dishing out fertilizers. I'm talking about corruption now. They buy a bag of fertilizer around $65 a bag. And if you go to communities, the bags of fertilizer are being sold at $10, $12. And they come back to the retail markets at $32. That's the cycle which you are working around. And that's corruption. So this is what is killing us more than sanctions. Last area which I want to talk about is the issues around the human rights abuse, because that is what they're bearing on our capacity to attract investments, right? And that is one of the things which also attracted sanctions. We are aware of the coup and how many people were injured and abused in that coup. That's human rights abuse. We come to August 2018, the shooting. There's no explanation for that for Zimbabweans. We come to January 2019, the shooting when people were demonstrating against fuel prices and people lost their lives, right? Now we come to the oppression nature of our system, where on ZBC, you don't see balanced view. It's just like ZANU PF Broadcasting Corporation. So, you know, you cannot have national cohesion, that kind of a nature.
So, Gift, I will ask you a question here. Are you aware that part of the Lima agreement, remember the Lima agreement before the coup? I think it was 2016, but more importantly, and Sarah might know about this, the British made it clear to Mnangagwa and his government in 2018 that if reforms along the lines that you just mentioned, on human rights abuses, on governance issues, on the economy, if these were carried out, Britain was prepared, one, to help clear all arrears with the World Bank and IMF and everybody. Two, they were prepared to help lift sanctions. So lift sanctions, the first is themselves, and influence all the other organizations, the EU, other countries, to lift sanctions. And thirdly, they would have promoted Zimbabwe's readmission to the Commonwealth. And 5 years after the coup, there's been a failure to effect even the minimum required, even by Britain itself, which, as I made the cynical remark, appear to have supported the coup itself. What is it that makes it impossible? What is it that makes the government, the Zimbabwean state, so incapable, lacking in capacity to effect even the minimum required, not only by the British, as I just mentioned, but also vis-a-vis the international community, vis-a-vis its own citizens? What is it?
It's a drought of leadership. It's a drought of leadership. That is it.
Okay.
If you look at China from 1978, it was leadership which provided the right arsenal to reform the country. If you look at Malaysia, it's leadership. Singapore is leadership. So Zimbabwe suffers from a drought of leadership.
No, thanks, Gift. Thanks. Let me get to Tsitsi as a hand up. Tsitsi, then Petina. Tsitsi. Nengarewa. That's it.
My question has to do with what Gift Mugano has just been saying about a drought of leadership. But I am going to actually address the question to Sarah. Leaders come from the people. So if there is a drought of leadership, does this not point to a lack of capacity for developing people who have leadership potential within a society? So I really wanted to ask you, Sarah, do you think that there is a difference between leaders and the people, or are leaders just a sample of what is present and extant in the people?
Sarah, the question is yours.
I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist, but in fact, I would argue that what is most important is institutions. That we need institutions that enable people to lead, that don't reward corruption, that don't reward holding on to power at all ends. It struck me that when I asked our colleague about ZANU, the answer was all about, well, ZANU couldn't transfer power between generations because the big guy wouldn't let go. You know, it was all about, it wasn't about the institutional practices, it was about personality.
Yes, but
I think
can I just ask you, are institutions not made by people?
Absolutely.
And certain kinds of people make certain kinds of institutions.
And it's about accountability also. It's about a willingness. So a willingness not just to see the role of citizens as people who vote, but of being willing to say to the people up at the top when they do things wrong that they're doing things wrong. And there is this perception that actually that's, I think when you look at survey data and so forth, there's this perception often that in Zimbabwe and often in other post-colonial countries, accountability is seen as something, the person who holds the president account is maybe the ministers, not the people. So I think there are a whole series of things that are tied in here that you capture perfectly by talking about leaders and by talking about the people. It's seeing that as speaking as a political scientist, which is really the only way I can speak. But what strikes me is that I think we need to be careful of talking about some of these issues. Occasionally, when people have talked about these things this evening, there's been the suggestion that these things are just sort of innate. This is who we are as people. This is who we behave. And I think that the colonial state institutions, and particularly the Rhodesian state, the nature of it, shaped people's behaviors in certain ways. And the post-colonial state often seems to have reinforced those same behaviors. Why is it that in South Africa we see protests against government policy, and they're very rare in Zimbabwe? What is it about this? Isn't about the people. This is about norms that we've kind of adapted and adopted. And this is why, you're completely right. Leaders ideally aren't any different from the people they lead, but that there need to be expectations, it seems to me. And I sound like I'm lecturing or even preaching now, but this has got to be about one, building institutions, and Zimbabwe has always been very good at this. If we look looking historically, this emphasis on constitutionalism and on institutions, but the willingness to call things out. And that's where you've been such a huge example in your willingness to call these things out. But how does that become universalized? How does that become a norm? I think that's the real challenge.
The reality that the institutions in Zimbabwe actually collapsed or are non-functional. But I think Ghana's point about the leadership drought is an important point. But what Tsitsi, I'm not Tsitsi, I mean Petina has hand up. Petina?
Yes, thank you so much, Ibo. My hand is up, but I'm going to lower it now that you've given me the floor. Ibo, you and I had lunch on Friday with my mom and the baby, and you know we have a newborn in the house, so I'm going to have to make this my last contribution. So if you'll allow me just to say a few things in reaction to the brilliant contributions from my fellow panelists, I'll be very honored to do that. It's actually quite interesting that I know so many people on this panel through different times of my life. Tendai Biti and I were Trotskyists together. We were part of the same cell of the International Socialist Organization. I'm no longer a radical Marxist-Leninist, but I do take a very Marxist approach to analysis. And what I would like to say in response to Tsitsi, who seemed to dismiss things like trade and investment and focus on national healing, is to say, first of all, we can have both. We can have national healing. We can have the national conversations about how broken we are as a society, even as we try to grow our economy, even as we try to catch up with the rest of the countries on the continent. And in that respect, I want to quote this fantastic statement that Karl Marx wrote in an introduction to a treatise by Hegel, where he said, it's not the consciousness of man that determines his material being, but it's his material being that determines his consciousness. And I really believe that if we allow Zimbabwe to degrade into these slum cities, and you rightly talked about the drug problems amongst our youth, right? But how do you fix those drug problems if you don't address the issue of joblessness, the issue of unemployment, the issue of a lack of opportunity? It used to be that if you got a degree or a diploma, you could apply for 2 or 3 jobs and go for the one that you like. That's not something we can take for granted now. The youth of our country, the women of our country are all going into the informal sector, right? And that's why the continental project of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is so important. I'm gonna give you some shocking statistics, Ibo. What do you think is the percentage of intra-European trade? Just take a guess.
80%.
It's actually 59. And intra-Asian trade is about 79%. The percentage of intra-African trade is 18%. Only 18% of trade takes between and amongst African countries. And that's for many reasons. One, our export markets are oriented towards the West, and they tend to be markets for raw materials. So we don't beneficiate, we don't industrialize, right? And we don't create jobs. So trade is hugely important. And what the AFCFTA project is trade with industrialization, beneficiation plus export. And that's how you create those wonderful opportunities for young people and especially for women. Next year, I'm taking time out of my life to travel across the continent to talk to people in markets, because I believe that the informal sector is what's going to power this continent. I'm going to be talking to people in markets, I'm going to be talking to farmers to see how we can be more inclusive in how we talk about trade. Trade is not just about presidents meeting at summits and shaking hands. Trade is about including people. So I would say, Sisi, that I absolutely agree with you and with Tendai. We are a broken, Tendai Biti. I also agree with Tendai Dumbuchena for different reasons, but we are a broken society. We do need national healing, but we also need to grow our economy because we cannot afford to leave any more people behind. And in that respect, Ibo, I would like to nominate Gift Mugano, a brilliant guy, to represent me in my absence. But I also want to just say a few things about ZANU PF, the party. I remember saying to a few people, because it was a bit of a bee in my bonnet, that one of the things that disappointed me after November 2017 was the lack of magnanimity. The lack of magnanimity, the inability to reach out across the divide to say, dudes, we beat you, but we can still work together. Opposition, we can still work together. And we actually thought at one point in November that there was going to be a big sort of coalition government. We're going to suspend elections for maybe 5 years and everybody was going to come in and work together. And I remember saying this to a few people, and the response I got was, ZANU PF does not take commands. ZANU PF invites. So I thought, don't want to have anything more to do with conversations around ZANU PF. But one thing I will say on the question of ideology, and I think Saviour said some very interesting things, as did Tendai Biti. I listened to this fantastic talk in Cape Town with Joachim Chisano, and he said something very interesting. He said, in my current cabinet, there are only 3 people with liberation history, but everyone has liberation ideology. And I think that's the failure of ZANU PF, to extend the ideology to the next generation. And I think that failure is because, guess what? There is no ideology, really. Anyone remember the leadership code? Anyone remember what happened to that? You know, so there is no real idea of what ZANU PF stands for at the moment, beyond, as Tendai Biti said, using power to accumulate, right? So what needs to happen, the conversation in ZANU PF is who are we? What do we stand for? What are we offering to people of Zimbabwe? And at a time when I thought I could have influence in that direction beyond trade, I remember saying to Minister S.B. Moyo, the imperative now is economic development. The Chimurenga was about political power and you know, self-determination and all the rest of it. We got it. But what are we doing with that power now? How do we transfer it so that it's used for the benefit of the people of Zimbabwe? And I suggested the idea of, you know, the idea of the economic development of Zimbabwe as a new front in the Chimurenga, but clearly that wasn't received very well. And I remember quoting constantly this wonderful statement that Ronald Reagan used to say all the time, quoting Winthrop about the house on the hill. And I remember asking the president, what is the house on the hill for Zimbabwe? What does Zimbabwe look like in your imagination? What country are we building? Who are we as a people? What are we passing on to the next generation? But, you know, as Tendai Biti said so eloquently, I think that's not a conversation that they are ready to have right now. And sadly, for all of us, and this is why I think that it's really important for the opposition to seize that moment and reimagine Zimbabwe. What is Zimbabwe really? What is it that we want to be as a people? And finally, I'll just like to echo the comments that Tendai Biti made. I mean, my brilliant former ISO comrade, we have been devalued in terms of how we talk about politics. And I would even go further and say our political debates are incredibly degraded. I just want to leave Ibo with one last piece of advice to the opposition. Right? If you really believe that you're going to take over Zimbabwe in 2023, and you're going to govern it with people who are CCC only, I think that is a big mistake, because Zimbabwe is bigger than just one party, and it's the same advice I would give to ZANU PF. And I would also say that the engine of government should be the civil service, and you cannot expect the civil service to have loyalty to one party, because that's the mistake that ZANU PF made. The civil service should be impartial, the civil service should be professional, and the civil service and the diplomatic service and the military should serve the interests of Zimbabwe. And with that, I would really like to say thank you so much for inviting me, and I have to go and take care of a baby now. Thank you, Ivo.
Petina, thank you very much. Regards to your mom and to Uchi Junior.
Uchi
All
Junior,
the best.
I will. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. I'm now going back to my panelists, unless there are hands. I don't see any hands. I'm going back to my panelists. Tony Rila. Tony.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, part of this debate, and it's rich and very, very diverse, is to look at the coup and what are the consequences of it. And I think this remains an elephant in the room. And that is that one of the consequences of the coup was that we have 2 scandalous judgments, one by Chiweshi and cured by Chief Justice Malaba. And that is the interpretation that our constitution allows the military to intervene in civilian affairs when they believe it is the case. Now, that is not resolved. This is a major, major, major elephant in the room. Now, that's got to be fixed. And the question is, how do you fix that? Okay, with a judiciary that is notorious for making political judgments in favor of the state, and where you cannot take that case on them, the case to them, and expect some outcome. So unless the election will never ever cure the problem, and where I think that constitutional judgment, it basically breaks up the whole notion that we have institutions, because institutions we think of as offices and organizations. Actually, institutions are rules about how you do them. And if the most fundamental rule about the separation of powers and protecting the civilians is not cured, then I don't think we're going anywhere, because the trickle-down effect of a decision like that, I think, is so serious it's not true. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for bringing that up. I think it was something we raised. I've got three more people. I have Wilbert Mukori, Taurai Tinzwe, and Chennai Mutambasere. In that order. Wilbert, Taurai, Chennai.
Thank you very much, Ibo. I think the main problem we are having here is failing to appreciate the importance of the 2008 to 2013 GNU. I think that was the golden opportunity for Zimbabwe to reset its political system. We all talk here about ZANU PF has failed. We know that ZANU PF has failed. And I think SADC gave us the golden opportunity to reset that political system that had failed. And I think here, I noticed that in the Ebo Madrasa, you try to squeeze Tendai to say, why did the GNU fail? At the beginning, you actually started by talking with Tendai in South Africa about how SADC was not helpful. SADC was disappointed because the GNU failed to implement any meaningful reform. And we've got to applaud people like Lindiwe Zulu. She absolutely did her best to try to get those reforms implemented. And she was disappointed by our own opposition party and maybe ourselves as citizens as well, that we did not get behind people like Tendai Biti and say, why the hell are you not implementing reforms? We are not going to move anywhere as long as we pretend that we did nothing wrong during the GNU, because that was the opportunity. And if you can't see the opportunity, what's the point of giving you another opportunity? I think I remember listening to an interview that you, Ibo, actually had with Violet Gonta, where you were in Maputo, where the SADC leaders made a last-ditch attempt to get the reforms implemented. And that did not achieve the desired result, because MDC came back to Zimbabwe and participated in the elections. And one of the reasons why that actually happened was revealed by Patrick Chinamasa, because he called an interview, and in the interview, he said there is not one single reform outstanding in parliament. There was never, not even one single democratic reform submitted during the GNU. Why was that? Why did that happen? I think Tendai Biti needs to explain to people, particularly people on this panel, why did you fail to implement even one meaningful reform?
Yeah, I will give Tendai a chance to answer that. Taurai Tinzwe. Thanks, Wilbert. Taurai Tinzwe. Means speak out and we hear you. That doesn't mean you're Taurai Tinzwe. Probably a pseudonym. Taurai? Taurai? Taurai seems to have disappeared. Chennai? 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 No Chennai either.
No, I'm here, sorry. Just having a bit of a battle with my mute button. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So I've been listening to this very interesting discussion. And I have to say that from what I'm hearing, there isn't any one unanimous answer to get us out of this mess, right? Because we are in a mess as a country. Some will say, let's move towards dialogue. Is dialogue the answer? There's been a point highlighted about the role of the military and how perhaps we need to restore it back to civic duty rather than partisan efforts. There's been a talk around addressing the state capture of judiciary, and some have highlighted the change through the ballot. And I think until all change agents or everybody who considers themselves as somebody who is interested in addressing change in Zimbabwe can have a unanimous answer, which will then command unanimous effort towards this one thing, I think only then do we start to really, eat the elephant. And for me, that one answer, hopefully, will be to effect change through the ballot, because something has got to happen first. I think we are too far gone for dialogue. I don't think the bargaining power exists really to have a level playing field that is required for effective dialogue. I think once everybody, all institutions and individuals, whether local or diaspora, really move towards one concerted effort, only then can we unanimously, come out and have a unanimous approach out of this situation. So my question is, what is that unanimous answer? What is that one thing that we all should really focus on? And what I'd like to put in the hat is to effect change through the ballot. Is that the one thing that we all need to address our efforts towards, so that we can start to begin the journey of change? We can start to take that first bite of the elephant towards a restored and renewed Zimbabwe.
Thanks, Jenai. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have to take just one more now. Lloyd Musipa. Lloyd, I'm sorry, Irvin and Honors. Lloyd Musipa.
Thanks, Doc. I was struggling with the unmute button. Doc, I go back to what Tony says earlier on. The elephant in the room remains the military coup of November 2017. Until that is sorted out, I don't think we're going anywhere as a nation. We can have one election after another. That will not solve our problems. We have an incumbent who is the beneficiary of a military coup, going against an opposition that is almost unprepared, unresourced. What is going to happen? We're just going to keep going down this rabbit hole. We are a nation that's traditionally solves its problems through dialogue. Go back into history. Geneva, Lancaster, the Unity Accord, Ian Smith and ZAPU and ZANU, the global political agreement with Shanghai, and the latest problem we've had, which is the 2017 coup issue, has not yet been discussed by the people of Zimbabwe. We cannot go anywhere until Zimbabweans turn and focus on the issue of the military coup. What happened? Is the government of the day legitimate? No, it is not. So why are we going to for elections in 2023? We have this cyclical politics that we are playing, and it is not helping us as a nation. Let's recognize the elephant in the room, or agitate for an all stakeholders conference that will bring everybody to the table.
Thanks, Lloyd. Thanks, Lloyd. We'll come to that. I'm now going back to my panelists, beginning with Tendai. Tendai, a very cogent question was put to you. Why was there failure to effect reforms during the GNU? Why, by implication, did the opposition party MGC go to sleep during the GNU on the issue of reforms? And significantly, the GNU gave ZANU PF the chance to reorganize and become more formidable and force through an election in 2013 against the advice of SADC. So Tendai, briefly, please.
Well, everyone knows that reforms were agreed upon. We pulled out of the government or disengaged on the 16th of October 2009. 5 November 2009, Jacob Zuma summons us to Maputo for a conference. We, the negotiators, were given a mandate to conclude all outstanding issues, beginning from December. By 3 April 2010, we had finished. By 6 April, we had given the principals all the answers, but they were never implemented. And they were never implemented because ZANU were not interested, because the things that needed to be implemented were attacking and dealing with power, including the issue of the military that has been spoken of. And one of the weaknesses of the GPA was that it didn't have an enforcer, it didn't have an external enforcer in the form of SADC or the African Union. And we needed that scaffolding. All we had was the internal organ, JOMIC, but JOMIC had no teeth. But the real reason why that whole thing collapsed was because it didn't have enforcer, it didn't have external scaffolding. But I want to say that dialogue is never too late. Dialogue can never be discounted, and dialogue is the sustainable effort. Even those that are saying, let's just go to an election. We can't go to an election without reforms. Reforms are so key. Reforms are so key.
Transitional authority help. A transitional authority is a possibility.
I personally believe in that. I personally believe in the National Transitional Authority. I've argued about that. I've written about that. And the fundamental issue is that a National Transitional Authority is programmatic. It attends to certain issues. It's programmatic. It has got timelines. And it should have enforceable mechanisms. So to me, that's a no-brainer at all. A National Transitional Authority offers Zimbabwe a sustainable start.
Would be the international conference that Lloyd Msipa referred to be a viable beginning towards a transitional authority and an international conference.
Absolutely, but will ZANU PF be on board? Will ZANU PF be genuine? Or they'll just send poor Paul Mangwana to pretend they're there when they're not there? The problem we have is there right now, as Professor Muganu has said, we've got a kwashiorkor of leadership, a kwashiorkor that believes that ZANU will stay in power permanently, and that they can run this country to the exclusion of anyone and everyone, which is not possible. We need a new beginning. We need a new consensus, and they're too blind to see that because they can't see beyond their huge profits in the mansions that they stay in.
Tyson, I'd like to come in there. Can ZANU survive? Can ZANU survive a loss of the polls? Can ZANU survive a decoupling of the party and state? Argument being that ZANU PF right now survives only because of the conflation of the state. Briefly, please, Tyson.
Well, I think a political party in the model of ZANU PF, admittedly, it has very strong roots across the country, could and can survive if it can also be able to put on its agenda those issues that concern the people. We have to be able to put our best foot forward and address pertinent issues that are concerning our society. Certainly, the conflation has, for a very long time, assisted, and I think colleagues have spoken about the civil service, which is to a very large extent an extension of the political structure that is in place. And this is also owing to a historical structure that was built immediately after 1980. You can't run away from that, that there has been that connection, which has a political civil service, which born out of perhaps deployees from the liberation side. And this is the nature of most of
it's not true. It's not true. I was from the liberation struggle. I was a senior civil servant, permanent secretary. There was a genuine separation of powers. There was a professional civil service, a professional military, which did not interfere in politics, right? We had a vibrant legislature, with an independent judiciary. That's a fact.
Well, I don't know, Dr. Mandaza, you were responsible for
until ZANU,
you were Secretary of Manpower,
yes,
with Tekere.
And Public Service Commissioner.
Yes, and you brought in most of the people who were deployed in the public service. And so I think you actually must be able to deal with this issue yourself because you bear small responsibility.
No, I was just answering you. I was just answering that that you thought there was a relationship between a political public service and the legacy of the reparation. So I'm saying no. We understood very clearly the requirements of a civil service in our day. This was a subversion.
My brother, with all due respect, how did you become appointed chairman? You're coming from the war. You'd not been in the civil service before, but you became chairman of the Public Service Commission. How?
Because we observed the rules of the Public Service Commission. We observed the idea of separation of powers, and we did so.
No, but how were you appointed?
And I was appointed by the Public Service Commission, which was an institution.
Let me not push it further.
Anyway, you have answered the question. Let me move to Tsitsi.
Sorry, I was just going to say a last point there.
Carry on. It's all right, thanks. Sorry, yeah. Carry on.
My last point would really have been to say, I think we've had a very good discussion, vibrant discussion. And at the core of our discussion, I'll put two issues. The need for us to reconcile and heal the differences in our country, the need for us to unite our nation and start moving together as people with one accord. And secondly, let's deal with poverty. For as long as poverty is a currency that can be used by individuals to manipulate them, we will go nowhere. Zimbabweans must have that freedom to develop and have resources or have assets that they can be able to be in control of their future. When the people have been disenfranchised to the extent that we're actually seeing, it's very difficult for anybody to have a mind of their own. So it's essential that the history of our nation, the violence threat that we've had to deal with, be it from Gukurahundi, the issues of 2000, 2008, up to this day, violence, the coup and so forth, this has to be dealt with. Somehow we need to find closure. And I think we can't continue to allow a situation where we don't bring closure to this very difficult situation. And we then must quickly push forward the issue of the economy. We need to move our people out of poverty. The level of poverty that our people are living in is unacceptable. The resource management, the resources that we have, natural resources, must be put to good use.
So what's your view on the Transitional Authority? What's your view on that?
Well, I think you have looked at the Transitional Authority. It's a very good idea. And I think these are ideas that should be brought into a national discussion and allow us to shape a country without, saying where is it coming from. But it's essential that the National Transitional Authority can be part and parcel of the need to build a better Zimbabwe, a Zimbabwe that every one of us wants.
Thanks, Tyson. Thanks very much for agreeing to participate in this. Yes, thank you. I'll thank you again. Thank you. Tsitsi, there's some burning issues. I saw you flashing some points. Do you want to say something, clarify something as your last contribution? Tsitsi? Is Tsitsi gone? Tsitsi is gone.
No, I'm still here. Thank
okay,
you. Thank
come
you.
in, Tsitsi.
Yes, I think that when we speak from our areas of expertise. And I think the public is suffering so much that they want one of the experts to say this is the solution. There was a young woman who actually said, tell us what the thing is we must focus on. The situation is so complex that it is not one thing that we can focus on. We need a value that we want to work towards. And there will be many different strategies with many different tactics, all converging towards that value. And so I personally see a lot of potential in an institution like the NTA, which is programmatic, because it enables us to strategize across all those different sectors towards this value. And when we have begun that process of convergent strategizing, then we stand more of a chance of being able to keep moving towards that value in a political manner once this transitional period is over.
Thanks, Sisi. I take it you are just entering the afternoon now. Still have a long day to go.
No, I'm actually in Europe now. I'm in Europe.
Okay, a few hours behind, 1 hour or so. Okay, Tendai Dubuchena, before I turn to Sarah as our last panelist. Tendai, your last
can you hear me?
Yes. What are the possibilities of SADC and South Africa in particular supporting the idea of a national transitional authority on the basis that the projects in Zimbabwe are so rotten?
There's very little chance of that happening because the narrative SADC buys into from the regime in Harare is that there is no crisis in Zimbabwe, and therefore no need for external parties to involve themselves. And that's where we are. You see, it's well and good to talk about dialogue, consensus, transitional authorities and so forth in a vacuum. You've got to look at the balance of forces, right? What is there? What pressure is there on the Mnangagwa regime to take part in such initiatives, which carry in them the seeds of the demise of their own regime? At the moment, they have the power. There is no substitute when you are dealing with an entrenched regime. And this regime is more entrenched than Mugabe's because it's now a hybrid regime of ZANU PF stalwarts like Mnangagwa and the military. You are dealing with an entrenched hybrid regime which feels that its mandate, the source of its mandate is the liberation struggle, not the electorate, right? That's what you're dealing with. And there's no substitute for...
Tendai, that cannot go on indefinitely.
But you've got,
because
you've got to mobilize people. My point is,
the dialectic of power, no, let me put it to you as a political scientist that you are. The dialectic of power, the more you appear to be very strong and invincible, the more fragile you are. I would argue with you that the coup itself was the beginning of the demise of this regime. And therefore, in my view, what's required is to get some factors, regional and international, to convince them that they're going nowhere. Because they're going nowhere, it's clear, neither economically nor politically. So we have the crisis, the discussion this evening has all been about the crisis in Zimbabwe. So what would be your suggestion as to how we can go forward to try and get people, the regime in Harare to understand that in a crisis situation, it's unlikely to be readmitted in the Commonwealth, right? Elections won't resolve anything. And clearly the possibility of another military coup is real in this situation. So it'll be a cycle of crisis. What is your last word as to what can be done?
My last word is that,
yeah.
You see, they don't see themselves in a crisis. This is where you and I differ. They see themselves in power, and they see the opposition weak, and they see a population that has been largely subdued. Right? Now, in the absence of mobilizing people, raising their consciousness, right, and putting the pressure of popular mobilization on the regime, it will take a very long time to change the situation.
Don't depress us, Tendai. Thanks a lot, Tendai. Thank you. Sarah, last word from you. Is it possible, do you think it's possible to cure the coup in the context of a combination or alliance of national, regional, and international factors? Sarah?
I think if there's a clear commitment from the Zimbabwean people, then yes, there are a lot of allies out there. But Tendai's pragmatism is also very true. The current regime is, very happy with where they are. They've been very effective in weakening the opposition, in strengthening their positions. It's a very difficult situation. But I have to say, listening to you all here, I'm feeling more optimistic than I had been before I joined this discussion. But it's still a long way to go, it seems to me. But yes, I think Zimbabwe does still have an awful lot of international friends, but it's not the top of anyone's agenda anymore. And that's something I've said before, and you didn't like it the last time I said it, and you won't like it this time. But that's the reality, and it's going to be a struggle.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much for coming to the struggle as you did this evening. Thank you very much indeed. We have had, as Tony said, we've had a rich discussion. We expected that, given of panelists that we've had. And we nearly got to some kind of agenda for action in the form of the proposed Transitional Authority. But as Sarah just said, it's a long way yet. So I'd like to just, in thanking all of you, Sarah, Tendai, Petina, Tsitsi, Tyson, and Tendai, thank you immensely. This you'll be pleased to know that we had over 100 people on Zoom, on almost 150 on Facebook, and this will be recorded, of course. It will be on YouTube, so you'll have a recording. We'll be also transcribing it to make it a very important document in our series. As you know, this policy dialogue is being held in tandem with a series on the electoral process in Zimbabwe, a kind of audit of the electoral process. We've gone halfway through it, and we hope that in February, towards the end of it, we will be having an international conference to audit, to make some conclusions as to whether there will be a free, fair, and peaceful election in 2023. Indications are very, very pessimistic so far, with increasing violence, and as you heard from the various panelists, a very state in which the opposition is regarded as an enemy. So we have a tall mountains to climb, and at that stage we hope we'll be able to have all the key national factors, regional, SADC, AU, international community, the Commonwealth, the EU, the USA, the BRICS, at that conference. Then we can decide whether it is possible to have the international conference of the Lancaster type to say, look, we're going nowhere in Zimbabwe, so it's a vicious cycle. Can we design a way forward? So that is what we are looking at. Again, thank you very much, and goodbye to all our friends who joined us from all over the world, and old friends and new friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibo. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
And thank Gift Mugano. Sorry, I forgot to thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Avoti tango ekomaka kaina komi moto ona